Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 492. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another exciting guest. Today, I'm talking with Lauri McKean. Now, I often get asked by women how to overcome fears of solo adventures. That's why I talk about it so much on this podcast and also on my blog. Lauri has a great story of how she overcame her fear of solo backpacking and camping, and how facing that fear has had a positive effect on other areas of her life. So I hope you find this inspiring and useful to overcome your own fears. So who is Lauri McKean? Lauri is a lover of the natural world who has a fondness for hiking, backpacking, kayaking, and foraging edible and medicinal flora and fungi. She grew up in the magnificent state of Colorado, USA, where the Rocky Mountains meet the high desert, and spent much of her childhood outdoors, exploring these lands with her family. As an adult, she continued these outdoor adventures with friends and partners, but felt uncomfortable with the idea of spending a night in the woods alone. At age 49, she decided to finally face this fear head on and challenge herself to a one-night solo backpacking excursion. This not only resulted in a magnificent night, but also the confidence and freedom to venture out for many others. Further, it was part of a transformational process that redefined her relationship with herself, her purpose, and others. Many of the things that she learned during this process, she now applies in her work as a love, dating, and relating coach through her business, Aligning to Love. So, what are you going to learn in this week's episode? We discuss why Lauri decided to challenge her fear of solo backpacking and camping, how mindset work and personal development work helped Lauri overcome her fears, how facing her fear of solo camping has changed Lauri's life, how facing this fear helped Lauri to face other fears, and finally, Lauri's top tips for women who are afraid to try solo adventures. So I hope you find this episode interesting and useful and inspiring. Hello, Lauri. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, I am a 53-year-old woman. I live here in the U.S. in the beautiful state of Oregon. And I am currently a love, dating, and relationship coach and mentor, primarily for women over 40. And I love weaving in all sorts of experiences I've had in the past into kind of the theme of relationships. So that's a little bit about who I am.
So what are your favorite outdoor adventures?
So many of them. I would say that for me, backpacking, I guess what some people, I think Europeans tend to think of it more as the word trekking. Yeah, that is really kind of combines some of my loves because I love hiking. I love just being in really remote areas in the wilderness, and I love camping. So when I can combine all that with backpacking, trekking, that makes me pretty happy, puts me in a pretty happy place.
Nice. So you grew up in a remote area of Colorado and you've been hiking and camping all your life. What fears did you have around solo adventures?
Well, that's interesting because you'd think that somebody who was kind of immersed in that, I mean, even as a young child, I was up in the woods and in the mountains so often, and we didn't tend to go on a lot of trails where I lived. We just kind of hiked and went, and my father was known for taking us up ridges and along the foothills of the mountains. And then looking at the two of us kids and saying, okay, find your way back to camp. And usually we're kind of didn't do well in that area, but we learned over time. So, I feel so fortunate to have that background and that comfort, being in the wilderness. But what happened as an adult, I was actually often more fearful of other people I might come across. And especially as a woman, I think we really, for women being in the woods alone, for me at least, there is that fear of running into men with not so great ideas and intentions. And so that was actually my main fear. I mean, of course, the background noise fear of what about predators? What about getting lost? What about getting hurt and being alone? But those were a little more in the background, and then running into other men with bad intentions was the big one for me.
Hmm. And have you ever had any issues with people on the trails, or was this just a fear?
It was a fear. I have not had issues. Certainly, I know that can happen,
Yeah, yeah.
and here in the US with so many guns and things like that as
Yeah.
well, it might be a little different flavor to it than in Europe as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the things that, I mean, I'm glad that I live here where we don't have guns, but I don't think I would do the things I do if I lived in the States because I'd just be really afraid. I mean, a gun gives someone so much power over you.
yeah.
Like the playing field is not at all level if one person has a gun. Like that's a whole different.
No. Yeah, the martial arts kickboxing background doesn't come in.
No, it doesn't. My black
Yes.
belt has not helped me to dodge bullets. So
No,
maybe that's
no.
an advanced level.
Yes, exactly. And it's interesting. I have a martial arts background with Tai Chi as well, but it is really interesting because I was told many times from people who knew once I started going out backpacking solo, people were like, you need to have a gun. You need to have a gun. What are you doing? You can't go out without a gun. And, and they would cite because of cougars,
Yeah.
mountain lions. And it was interesting because I did go through a period where I just dabbled in investigating, what would it be to have a handgun? Heavy are they for backpacking? And considered do I want to do this? And then I realized that my experience of being in the woods, the fear would go from some problem where I needed a gun to defend myself. My fear would then be having the gun and misusing it, or not feeling like, oh, I have to worry about this weapon that's on my body all the time. And I thought, I don't really want to, why trade that one fear for another? It just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I belong to a bunch of Facebook groups of women in the outdoors, and there's this trail running for women Facebook group that I belong to, and that topic often comes up, like, how do you stay safe? And invariably, like half the women are like, I bring my gun with me. I never run without my gun. And I just can't imagine going on a run with a gun. But I was interviewing someone once for this podcast, and she was ex-military. And I asked her about this. And she said, I never go hiking with my gun. I never go backpacking with my gun. And I'm ex-military. So I think it's such a very personal decision. And I'm very glad I don't have to make that decision.
Yes, yes. And I'm comfortable with the decision I did make, because even though I grew up with a father who hunted, and there were a lot, I grew up with guns on a core level. When I have one in my hands, I just don't feel comfortable. And,
yeah,
that's
it. Yep. All right. So guns aside, what made you decide to challenge your fear of solo backpacking and camping? What was that tipping point where you're like, you know what? I'm going to do something about this?
Oh, well, the biggest thing, I was motivated by, yes, getting over the fear, but I was also motivated by I didn't want to feel like my access to the wilderness was dependent upon others. The other people's schedules, their availability, their own desire, their own ability for backpacking, carrying a pack, and their own health. I had been going backpacking. I have another woman friend, and we generally do a trip every year together. But it was always this big deal to get together and schedule it and everything. And I was living in a place, another fairly remote place in northeastern Washington state, near the Canadian border, tons of wilderness all around me. And I wanted to just be able to go out for a weekend and climb the mountain and camp. And I couldn't do that with a fear. So that was part of what was coming up. And also, the first solo backpacking trip I did was on my 49th birthday.
Mm.
Yeah. And at that point in my life, I had, for the first time, been single and unattached for 2 years, like intentionally. I had decided these relationships aren't working and I need to figure this out myself. So I'd started this process of personal development and personal growth work. And it just felt like getting to a comfort level with the solo backpacking was part of this development that I was already on. And it would open up the doors for me for more time in the wilderness. So that was the impetus.
And how did you get over your fear and manage to do this for a solo trip? Did you just kind of feel the fear and do it anyway? Did you put any like safety nets in place? What did you do?
All of the above.
Yeah.
I feel like one piece of the foundational piece of doing it was that personal development growth work I was already doing, really looking at mindset, really looking at fears and embodiment work too, because I knew that if I could really be comfortable in my body and my energy and feel grounded, and not be, in the monkey mind, the head, the worry part of myself. If I could stay in that, the fear wouldn't be as debilitating. The fear would be manageable. And so that was part of it. There was also, of course, I did set myself up for success. It was like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to do a really short trip. I think I backpacked in to a lake that was only 3 miles, only 3 miles in and then same back. I only went for one night. I went relatively close to home. I had a friend who knew the trail I was going on. She knew when I should be back. And I carried bear spray with me.
Nice.
Yeah. So I felt like, okay, it's going to be simple. I'm going to set myself up for success. I didn't think, I'll just go hike the Pacific Crest Trail for 3 months like Cheryl Strayed did.
Yeah.
It was like just a simple test. And so that's how I did it. And I just, it was just one of these things where I was like, aware of the fear and aware of that block, but also aware of the intention for challenging myself, aware of the benefits, more focused on the benefits than the fear. And again, staying more in that energy, the embodiment energy versus my mind and the fear, and setting it up for success.
And so what was that experience like when you were actually out there alone by the lake? Did your fears come up? How did you deal with them?
It was interesting because the fear was more prevalent in preparing for the trip. Once I got to the trailhead, got my backpack on and started up the trail, there was kind of like a checklist going through my mind. Did I do this? Do I have this? Can I actually get to the bear spray quickly if I need it? All of these, there was a lot of that. But the further I got on the trail, the more I just rested into trust and rested into fun, the pleasure of doing it. And so there was that pleasure that kind of kept building and fun as I got up to the lake. And there was a little bit of trepidation, anticipation of how's it going to be in the dark of the night? Like I was even questioning, like, am I going to be able to sleep or am I going to be up all night?
Yeah.
And I got up there and it was just, so beautiful. And I did go, I think it was a Sunday night. So I knew there wouldn't be, again, a remote area. So I knew there wouldn't be a lot of people. There actually was a couple we were in different areas of the lake, but they were up there. I wasn't completely alone. I was off in an area by myself and I set up my tent and made dinner and like I just the longer I was there, the more just into it and excited about it I became, and there was just this beautiful sunset and clouds, and I just felt so inspired. And I kept kind of, again, staying in my body, doing some of my energetic practices that are really grounding. Qigong, which is a Chinese energetic art, and just dancing to the sunset, no music, just movement. And then I did a little bit of meditation and reading that was in the tent in the dark. And I just read until I was tired. And I continually kind of felt more at ease, more peace, and just fell asleep. And somewhere in the middle of the night, there were big splashes in the lake that woke me up. And I was like, oh shit, what's that? There were these big splashes. And I just kind of, I was like, okay, bear spray's right here. I just stayed in my tent and listened. And there was crashing through the brush, then going up past my tent, but up the hill. And I was like, okay, you could clearly tell that whatever was there had left, because it was big and it was running through the brush, and it went from loud to soft. And, and I was interesting. I was surprised. I fell right back to sleep. I know I kind of had an adrenaline rush going on, but for some reason I was able to just fall right back to sleep, wake up to a beautiful morning, just spent the morning at the lakeside by myself. Just, it really blissed out. Just this sense of like, okay, I have broken through the barrier. I have gotten through that first night by myself in the tent. And it was interesting because I remember seeing a snake by the campsite. And then as I was packing out on the trail, I came across a snake skin. It had been shed. And I still have that. I have saved it because it was such a beautiful symbolic piece of, okay, I have shed this layer of fear and kind of stepped into a new relationship with myself and with nature and with the activity of being out in the woods. So, yeah.
So have you repeated the experience? Are you now like an avid solo camper?
I am. I wouldn't say I've repeated it every weekend, but yes, I have done multiple trips since then, both solo and with my friend again. So yeah, it's repeatable.
Nice.
And the background fears still come up. They're still there. It's not foolproof. It's not like, oh, now I just never think about who I might run into or predators or how it'll feel in the dark. But I know it's doable. I know it's actually, once I get there, it will be pleasurable and exciting for me. So yeah, and I do. I love the feeling of just being able to get out there and not have to be dependent upon other people's schedule and ability. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
Good. So how has facing your fear of solo camping changed your life? Like what kind of ripple effect has it had on other areas of your life?
Yeah, it's had a lot of effect. And, for sure, solo camping, it wasn't like it's an isolated thing. I mean, there was so much I was doing to grow, and that was a part of it for sure. But it's given me a sense of more autonomy and sovereignty, really. And I see it, the work that I do and how I am now with my partner, it's very symbolic of those things. It's like being able to kind of really craft your own reality and be with yourself and be comfortable really solo, even in an environment that doesn't breed that comfort naturally. It's an important thing for being in the rest of the world, other environments. And it's so important for relationship too, because I'm just so much more solid in me. And solid in my own being and my own sense of myself, that bringing that into relationship, whether that's romantic relationship or work relationships or family, it really sends out ripples. It really does. Yeah.
And how has it helped you to face other fears?
It's wonderful because I think the more I face the fears, the more it ripples out and to other fears. So it was a primary one. That was a
Mm,
primary fear. It kind of goes to the core of like being alone in the dark, being alone in the woods, the fear of violent men. Those are pretty primary for women. And so the fact that I could kind of go into some of those deeper primary fears and be able to kind of unravel them through a positive confirming experience, it makes it easier to do that with all fears and other fears that aren't as primary as those. So it's definitely huge. And that's one of the things that I really encourage my clients to do. Not all of them are going to want to go out in woods because that's just,
it's a bit
with a
niche.
bat. Yeah, it is a bit niche. I would highly recommend it, but not everybody's going to want to do that. But I encourage my clients to like basically find something that challenges discomfort, challenges fear, like every day, little things, because I think that it creates such a ripple effect. And when we start, there's different ways to approach it. There's the like dive right in, like I did, to a big one. And then the small ones are a lot easier. But there's also kind of work the small ones first and build up and work up to the bigger ones. So that's two ways to kind of work with it, fear.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I often get asked by women who want to overcome fear of solo adventures and they want to know how. So you've already given us a couple of tips, but do you have any more tips for women who are afraid to try solo adventures, but they really want to break that fear?
Oh, that's a great question. I would first recommend spending a little bit of time really going into the fear. Because often with fear, it's there and it kind of paralyzes us, but we're in a little bit of resistance and avoidance with it, right? There's that little bit of like, just keep pushing it away, keep pushing it away. And one of the things I really recommend is something like fear. You actually go towards it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Go towards it in your mind, not go towards it like just make yourself go out in the woods, but first go towards it like in your mind, in your emotions. Actually augment the fear. Make it go to the worst case scenario.
Yeah. What's the worst that could happen?
What's the worst that could happen? And as you're doing this, I recommend doing some sort of like even just kind of bouncing and shaking the body because fear it's an energy that gets really concretized in us. It becomes this kind of dense concrete thing. And if we can actually go towards it and kind of shake a little bit and just kind of keep moving the energy, it tends to unravel and tends to soften. So that would be the first thing I would do. And I would actually, another thing that I really recommend is using your voice, activating the throat, the voice. So actually, as you go towards the fear, as you're shaking, just talk about all the fears, everything that could happen. Oh my God, the worst case scenario. Oh, I couldn't handle this. I can't, actually verbalize what it is that you think, not just in your head, because that shakes up the energy too. And then to go from there, when that energetic charge of fear has kind of shifted a little bit, to start to, either talk to somebody about or start to journal about what are the benefits of what I am wanting to do, I'm afraid to do. What are the benefits of that solo for me? And so we have a sense of like what's drawing us forward. And so that can be as strong as the fear, because sometimes we never get to the what's drawing us forward. Sometimes it's a sense of, I should be able to do this. Other women can do this. I should be able to do this. And that's not really what draws us forward.
Yeah, it's not really useful.
It's just a should. It's an idea. So to get into more of what's the pleasure, what's the like, yummy, what's the excitement of what I'm wanting to do that I'm fearful of. So there's a couple ways off the top of my head that I would encourage women to start working with that fear.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us today and telling us your story. Where can people find you online and learn more about what you do?
Well, I am at aligning2love.com. My business name is Aligning to Love. And yeah, it has a lot to do with aligning to love, has a lot to do with removing fear.
Yeah.
Moving through fear and really becoming our authentic and fully expressed selves. So that's my website. And I do have a free offer for your listeners. I have a free clarity session. If anyone would like to talk about moving through fears, we can talk about solo backpacking. We can talk about how it relates to relationships, all sorts of things.
Cool. And we'll link to that in the show notes.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Do you ever talk about your adventures on your social media, or is it all kind of relationship related?
Well, seasonally, I often do.
Nice. It's a bit cold where you live right now, isn't it?
It's a little rainy and cold. Yes, it's harder to get in the mountains. But I do often, especially in the summer, talk about, actually on my social media this summer, I was talking a lot about conditioning for backpacking and how that related to other things in life. So yes, definitely follow me there, and I'll talk a lot more about it in the summer.
Sounds like a plan. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lauri. It was great to hear your story.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. If you enjoyed this episode, you might want to check out these related episodes. 477, I talk with Nicole Snell about mastering outdoor self-defense. 462, I discuss overcoming the fear of solo walking and adventures. 430, I talk with Sue-Ann Hickey about adventures and solo cycling tours. 414, I talk with Rebecca Walsh about solo hiking for women. And finally, 367, I discuss finding yourself through solo travel and outdoor adventures. So that's all for now. Remember to visit hollywharton.com/492 for the show notes on this episode. Thanks for listening and happy trails to you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.